There we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Kathy Jones, and I think everybody's here now. Attendants are starting to come in. We'll give it a couple more seconds for people to come on in. Just to say hello and make sure the chat function works properly. Feel free to say hello in the chat and let us know where you're coming in to the webinar from. Oh, still more people. We'll give it just a couple more seconds. Well, maybe things have settled down, so we'll get starting. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Kathy Jones, and I'm a volunteer manager biologist with Birds Canada, and I'm the person you usually talk to for the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program. We also have with us today Dr. Doug Tozer, who's the director of the Waterbirds and Wetlands with the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program sits under, and he's going to share a lot of information with us today. So I'm glad you're all able to come and listen. To start, let's have a bit of a land acknowledgement. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am just northeast of Long Point on Lake Erie, and Doug's in the same area. And this location is on the traditional lands and homes of the Haudenosaunee, Adirondack, Anishinaabe, and Mississauga peoples. And I am within the area 1792 Treaty 3, sometimes called the Between the Lakes Treaty. I and Birds Canada support the needs, aspirations, and rights of Indigenous peoples to care for the land. The panelists and guests, all you got people on board, come from many parts of Turtle Island. So I'm going to put a link in the land in the chat and so that you guys can look it over and decide where your treaties and lands are you under. Nina, I see you have a hand raised already. If there's a concern, maybe you can send me a chat.
Yeah, and quick, Kathy, in the chat, it looks like the chat might be disabled. Do you have to press something to make that work?
I may have to. That might be one of the problems.
Good evening, everyone, by the way. Happy to see you all.
Yes, this is how often we only do this so often. Sometimes it's hard to make these things work. I'm gonna just.
It's me too. Anytime I'm near technology, it tends not to work.
So I just said that you could chat. You guys, maybe that was Nina's question. You guys can let me know if you can see the chat now and maybe. Oh,
yeah, now
yay!
it's working. All right.
Nina says it's work. Yeah, there's always something at the beginning of these things I miss. So thank you for pointing that out, folks. Yes, let us know who you are and where you're from, and just a little bit of housekeeping now that the chat's working. You're welcome to put anything technical in there. We have the Q&A for questions, and it looks like some questions are coming in, or maybe those are the chat items. Yes, it is a chat item. So, you can raise your hand if you want to speak. We weren't sure how many people were coming, so we set this up in webinar mode, and our numbers are enough. It's probably a little bit tough to do this as a meeting, but if you want to speak, go ahead and put your hand up and we will open it up and we will make you a panelist and you can speak. What else is there? If anybody needs closed captioning, the option's at the bottom and you just have to activate it for your computer and it's right beside the Q&A option. And that's it. So hopefully you can all work now and I'm going to sit and turn this over to Doug so that he can start sharing with you.
Okay, great. I'm just going to share my screen here in theory. And there. Are we seeing my first slide? I assume so.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so welcome to the What's Up with the Great Lakes MMP, or the GLMMP as we like to call it, or the Great Lakes MMP for short. Let's go to the next slide here. Here's what we've got planned. There's 26 updates. Now, we're not going to do all 26 in the first webinar. These are to be spread across the 3 webinars, of which tonight is the first of the 3. So tonight, what we figured we'd probably try to chew on is sort of the first five there, which are upcoming changes to the field protocols. Thought we'd go through that and sort of have a chance to ask questions and go back and forth. We're really keen to get some feedback on these things because they're these changes that we have planned. They're just plans. They aren't written in stone. We're just sort of considering them, and so getting some feedback would be really appreciated. The rest of the things, number 2 to 5 there in the list, is just it's basically going through um, papers, science that we projects that we've been up to in the last 5 years, and some of it's recent science and future science. Those are there's 9 recent ones and 4 future ones. Those actually use Great Lakes MMP data for some kind of analysis for conservation purposes. And then there's number 4, there's related science. It doesn't use MMP data per se, but it's directly applicable to marsh bird and frog conservation in the Great Lakes. So it's kind of related. And other but still relevant science is sort of the same kind of thing. It's related to marsh birds and frogs, but a little more separate from the Great Lakes MMP by a little bit more. So um, upcoming changes, we can just dive right in here. And Kathy, I can't see the chat or the Q&A or whatever. So just cut me off if there's a question we should stop and answer because I can't see that. So first, changes to the bird survey protocol. So on the left there is the current field sheet for Great Lakes MMP birds. For those of you who do the program, you'll recognize it and know it well. And I've circled 3 things on there. And we we plan to change those 3 things between now and 2027. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. All these changes that we're going to talk about, field protocol changes for birds and for frogs, we aren't planning these to actually happen until the 2027 season. So not this spring and not even next spring for the 2026 season, but for the 2027 season. So we still got time. It takes time to do these things and get them in place. And we got to redo all the instruction booklets and the forms and all that kind of thing. So the big the big orange oval there is circling the focal species minute by minute detection history tables. You'll be familiar with these. If you see a Virginia rail or a Sora or a least bittern, you keep track of each minute that you detect that individual, these so-called minute by minute individual detection histories. And of course, the reason we do that is those minute by minute detection histories are one way. There are many ways, but it's one way to adjust for differences in detection probability. And this is like a big thing in statistics for marsh birds or estimating any kind of abundance or density estimate for birds these days. A big thing is to account for differences in detection probability. And suffice it to say, it's pretty complicated math. Most days I kind of think I understand it, but it's really, really complicated stuff. But suffice it to say, you can use those minute by minute detection histories in order to do that, to kind of make the data more robust and more useful for whatever your conservation application is. However, like I said, there's a many different ways to do it. And long story short, we've done some analyses where we basically show that you don't need those minute by minute detection histories. You can do just as well with adjusting for detection probability with collecting other things that are a lot easier to do. So we think we're just going to scrap the minute by minute detection histories because we just don't think we need them. And there's some advantages to this. It makes things simpler because excuse me, we don't need to distinguish between focal species and other species anymore because we'd just be collecting the same data for everything. So that makes things simpler for somebody learning the program and the protocol. They don't have to remember, oh yeah, I do this for focal species and I do this for non-focals. You just do the same thing for everything. And another thing is, like in the Great Lakes, it's not too hard to keep track of your focal species individuals because you don't have that many. I mean, some of us have lots of stations where you don't see any focal species, so it's easy, right? But in other places in Canada where we do the Marsh Monitoring Program. We use the same kind of protocol. We do these minute-by-minute detection histories. It's a lot busier. Like on the prairies, for example, in the prairie pothole wetlands, some people have, like 6 or 7 American coots alone in their station, in addition to other focals. So it's almost impossible to keep track of all those individuals minute by minute. Like I can't do it. So that's another advantage for scrapping these detection histories, because you just can't do it. Again, like I say, not really an issue for the Great Lakes, because you very rarely have a station where you're so overwhelmed that you can't keep track of each individual. So suffice it to say, we think we're going to get rid of that, and we think we can do just as well with other stuff. Um, okay, I'll just keep blabbing until you cut me off, Kathy, for anything.
Ashley, I might cut you off right here, and you probably covered
Yep,
this already, but I wanted to reiterate it. Just to remind people that I know you've been doing this technique for years, but now we have learned and we have these measures that we can accommodate for them in the science and say, we know this is the case. And there is a good reason for us to do those detections earlier, but now we know that we have enough data collected behind us. We don't have to. You probably already mentioned that, Dave, but Doug, but I wanted to reiterate it.
it's a really good point. Like all these changes that we're proposing that you're going to hear, all 5 of them, will back up with data. Like, I'm going to show you one near the end, the 5th one, I think, the last one, where we've already published a paper that says we can do this. So yes, for this minute-by-minute detection history stuff, we've partnered with a statistician at Western University, Simon Bonner, and we basically, if you're interested, this is kind of cool. I'm into this kind of stuff because I'm a numbers geek, but um, we simulated Marsh Monitoring Program data. So we made some rules in the computer, and we created a data set where the power of that is, like, what the answer, like what the abundance is that you're trying to estimate, because you created the data. So we have the simulated data where we know the truth. And then we basically we pretended, okay, we know the truth, but we'll pretend we don't really know the truth. You know what I mean? And we'll try and estimate the truth. And we did it using the minute by minute detection histories, and we used some of these other methods that rely on data collected in the field that's easier to collect. And then we just sort of looked at the answer. We looked at the trend and the annual indices that we were getting, and especially the confidence intervals. You want a precise and accurate estimate. Both are important. And we're basically getting the same thing. So and we haven't published that paper, but we plan to do it. And when we do, then we'll have, the sort of authoritative kind of analysis to point to that says, we can get the same for less kind of thing. And the less is kind of like what we do for the secondary species. So all you really need to do is record for each individual the first minute or the first time slice. It doesn't even have to be the minute. It could be, for secondary species, we do the first 5 minutes, the middle 5, and the last 5. We have so-called 3 time slices, right? If you just did that for your focal species, it's good enough. All you have to know, you see a Sora rail, just need to know, did I first detect that Sora in the first, the middle, or the last 5 minutes? That's all you need to do, and then you're done with that individual. You don't have to, you know, uh, follow it all the way through. So it just makes things a little bit simpler. Okay. Um, I'll pick one of the other orange ovals because this is sort of like a 3-in-1, this slide. Let's go to the next one, the eliminate outside fly-throughs. So we've always had this distinction where we treat birds that are flying over, foraging over the station differently, and ones that are beyond the 100 meters differently. And what we're sort of proposing to do is kind of do away with that distinction too. You just wouldn't have that. So anything beyond the 100 meters, or even if it's flying over the station and it's closer than 100 meters, or it's foraging or it's flying over, it gets treated the same as if it were perched on a shrub within 100 meters, or, it's just same as everything else. And that there's some advantages to that, because that I'll get into later. um, I think and you can see sort of the theme here is that we're kind of going towards any bird that you detect gets the same treatment. There is no outside fly through. There's no focal versus non-focal. It's just everything's the same. And then the third change is the half circle. So interestingly, the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program, as far as I know, is the only marsh bird monitoring program in North America and maybe on Earth that does a half circle plot. Everybody else does a full circle plot. Um, and I think we should go that way. It makes the data a lot more powerful to combine it with other data sets because they're more comparable, right? They'd all be using full circles. And the full circle, it makes it easier to do some of the math for some of the things that we really want to use the MMP for. And one of those things is estimating density, which allows us to estimate total population sizes of some of these species. And that's gold, so to speak, because all of our species at risk status decision making, both provincially and federally in Canada, is based on total population sizes. So whatever we can do to fit into that better is really worth doing because it makes the program and the data that much more valuable to decision makers. Um, so it'd be, I think going the full circle would be a really good way to go for that. And you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner here, I've put this standardized North American marsh bird monitoring protocol. Um, we don't talk about this very much, so folks on the webinar might not be familiar with it, but there is this standard for marsh bird monitoring in North America. And it's basically, rules. This is how you should do your point counts when you do marsh birds. Um, and it calls for a full circle. So we'd be aligning ourselves with the North American standard as well by going full circle. Now, there's some disadvantages to it. I mean, the whole reason we did half circles in the beginning, and Kathy or others can correct me if I'm wrong, but was to make it simpler, right? Most of our bird stations are shore-based. So what's behind you usually is not marsh, and we sort of don't care so much about that. So if we go full circle, you end up sampling that, and that's true. Um, but often, I don't know, I find it's not that hard. I don't get that distracted by what's behind me, and we really want you to focus on what's in the marsh anyway. And it also makes it easier, like shorelines are never perfectly straight, right? So, um, and I think all of us tend to anything that's sort of along the shore, so to speak, we kind of count it as being in the half circle when really sometimes we probably shouldn't count it because it's actually out of the half circle. And so we'd get rid of that sort of challenge, right? You don't have to worry about whether it's sort of in the half circle plot because everything's in if you're full circle. So I think if you make these three changes, get rid of the minute by minute detection histories and you get rid of the outside fly throughs and you go full circle, I think you'd end up with something like on the middle sheet on the slide, which is that's a marsh bird survey form from the current Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas marsh bird survey. And I think that's basically what we'd go to is it would look like that. You'd have a full circle and you basically need to record three things for every bird that you see, whether it's a swallow flying over or a Virginia rail 10 meters in front of you or a red-winged blackbird that's 150 meters away. All the same, three things. The time slice that you first detected it in, and we don't really know what those time slices are going to be yet, but if we go with something like we did for the marsh bird survey for the breeding bird atlas, was it the first 3 minutes, the next 2 minutes, or the last five? So it's 3, 2, 5. They're not all evenly spaced. We may go with evenly spaced time slices, but anyway, the point is you just have to put down which time slice you first detected it in, and then you can forget about that part. And the other two things is, was it in front of you or behind you? And basically that's easy because it's where you draw it on the map, right? And the third thing is whether we want to have three distance bands. So right now we have, with the half circle plot, we've got basically two distance bands, right? Was it within 100 meters or beyond, right? There's sort of two. We'd be adding three. So is it 0 to 50? Is it 50 to 100? Or is it beyond 100 for three distance bands? And again, that's easily recorded in the field by where you put it on the map. I think, is everybody able to see my cursor? I guess they can. So, as long as you map it correctly, you're getting two of the three pieces of information just by where you write down your 4-letter code, because it's going to be in front or behind. And if you put it in the right distance band, you've got, 0 to 50, 50 to 100, or beyond 100. And then, as you can see, are like these superscripts, just like we do for the current GLMMP bird protocol. Say this one here is for the first of the 3 time slices. And down here, this is the 3rd time slice kind of thing. So it makes it really simple, right? It's just like, boom, I see a bird, doesn't matter which direction or how far away it is. What's time slice, in front or behind, and put it in the right time, and put it in the right distance band. And you've got those 3 pieces of information. It makes it really clean and easier. Kathy, any
There is
questions,
questions.
comments?
Is now a good time? Um, and I grabbed them from the chat. Most people are putting the questions in the chat. So the first question is, this is my first year, so for now, still follow the minute by minute. And yes, I want to reiterate, we will hit a point where we'll just say, okay, we're changing right today, period. And everything before has got to be one protocol. Everything after it's got to be a different protocol. And then the pros will get involved in doing analysis so that those data can work together in the future. But until we hit that trigger and we say time to change, then we need you guys to follow the existing protocols. Um, Somebody asked if since they do frogs only, this first part does not apply to me. The full circle does, correct? Or are we just
Oh,
going to
that's a
cover
good
frogs
question.
later?
Yeah, will we go full circle for frogs? That's a really good question. I mean, it seems obvious we should have thought about this, but I hadn't actually thought about this yet. um, that's a good question. We'll have to get back to you on that. Between
We'll get
now and
back to you on that.
2027, we'll figure that one out.
We'll make up our mind, yes. Um, and Bill Thompson, who's been with us for quite a while, says he likes the idea of going full circle. It always seems odd. You know what? Doug is right. Right from day one, the decision was we don't want people mucking in the middle of the wetland. So, and we went for the habitat, the semicircle approach because most wetlands do not that we survey do not have marsh behind them. It's going to feel equally odd to a lot of people when they go out and survey later and they say, but behind me is not marsh. And we're going to have to figure out better definitions to deal with that and things like that for the future. Um, and that again, that's part of the process. We have a lot. Do you see why we're getting 2027 in there? We got a lot to still sort out before we get there. Okay, the
And
next one
we've
is the
navigated through a lot of these. These are really good points, Kathy. We've navigated through a lot of these issues with the Atlas 3 Marsh Bird Survey Protocol, which also has a habitat protocol too, and it's full circle. So I think we've got some lessons learned there that'll help us.
well, the next one's about frogs, so I'm going to hold off on that. Um,
And there are
because
there's one frog change that's coming in the file.
yeah,
So
the other
here,
one is
Frogger, hang in there.
both hemispheres from back to back are surveyed separately. That can only happen for frog stations. Keep in mind that you cannot have bird stations that face opposite directions in the same location. So that question will hold off for later. Um, yeah, frogs behind you. I call that frogs behind you that get left out. I call that the Murphy's Law of amphibian surveys. There's always more calling behind you than in front of you. That's just a given. But remember, it's detection through time, right? So while you feel like you're missing frogs, you're still collecting data in that standard fashion, and that data still provides exactly what we need to know, and we can still see patterns from it. Because it's never our goal to get all the frogs. Our goal is to get a consistent pattern so we can see change through time. Um,
And another little point I thought, Kathy and you and I were talking about this earlier this week. Of course, one of the big things about the Great Lakes MMP is that we are able to look at trends. We can look at changes over time. And of course, therefore, it's important to have, compare apples to apples amongst all the years. So whenever you make a big protocol change like this, you really got to make sure that it's going to be comparable to the previous years that were collected differently, right? And that's where keeping track of things in the front versus the back half, especially for birds, and it'll be important for frogs too if we do that full circle for frogs as well. That allows us to filter data so that we can compare apples to apples, so to speak, across all the years. Because if we want to go back to 1995, well, for any full circle data, we'll just eliminate the back half because that's easy to do in the database. There's a field that just says front or back. So you just take out your back rows, and now it's just like old times with the forward facing half circle. But if you're not doing trends and you just want to use the newer full circle data to do like habitat relationships or something where you're not going back, to half circle days, then you can use all the data and you have all that power. So it's the best of both worlds. That's why we have this front back thing.
And there's decisions on our place like now because just sitting here listening to all the back versus front talk with frogs, we do that in one way, but at the same token, we're gonna have to sit there and watch about that frog distances. All our routes are designed so that your frog surveys are 500 meters apart or back to back. So every single frog station may need to be critically reviewed if we decide to do the full circle there. So I think it's easier to go full circle for frogs, and you can hear them all. But
Although, doing
yeah,
a single full circle frog point count is basically the same
yeah, it's easy.
as doing you do 3 minutes forward facing, you turn around and do your other 3 minutes. You could have done it in one 3 minute period and collected the same data just by listening in both directions. So it might just be more efficient for the same amount of data.
Now we have some questions here. I'm going to ask Chris's first because I think Bill's will be answered later. Um, Won't I see less behind me than in front of me? On my sites, there's no marsh behind me. That's the whole point. We can tell by those circles. We can split those up, right? Because you're identifying because of location on those maps, which ones are forward and which one's back. And we'll get into that process later. I see mostly birds in front of me. Yeah, that's quite a common with the way our routes are set up. And I don't perceive that changing because it takes a whole nother level of skill to be surveying from a boat and a whole nother safety issue. So I think we will continue to see more birds in front of us than we do behind. And
I think that's pretty normal. Like I find even with my um, stations that are way out in big marshes that I'm going to in a canoe and stuff, you still see more in front of you because our stations tend to be at the edges of emergent vegetation patches and they face inwards. So naturally, you have more birds detected where the emergent vegetation is versus like open water that tends to be behind you. That's not always the case. Sometimes you're on a narrow, canal between two big patches and you've got just as much behind you. That does happen. But I think on average, you're right. You usually have more birds in front of you all the time. It's a good point somebody made about like, if I just have a bunch of hardwood bush behind me, like why do we care about the full circle? It's not a marsh. It's true. But some of these point counts can get used for things other than marsh birds. And when you're sampling everything, then it can be combined with all kinds of other analyses because you recorded 360 degrees instead of just the forward facing. So it I think in a lot of cases, it may not really be obvious from a marsh bird standpoint what the usefulness is of the full circle, but it opens up a whole other world because you're recording everything and also recording um, the same information for each individual beyond the 100 meters as well, right? By getting rid of that outside fly through, we get all that information for everything, no matter what direction or how far away it is that it was detected. So it makes the data more useful because you got everything. You got the best of all the worlds, so to speak.
we won't leave you hanging. We'll walk you through this process when we get there. We should move on to the next one, Doug. It's 7:30 already.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Um, oops. Just have to get my cursor on. Hold on. There we go. All right. Okay. So, the other big change for birds is returning to 10-minute point counts. Now, we've been on 15-minute point counts since 2008. But for some of you who may not realize, from 1995 to 2007, we did 10-minute point counts. We only changed to 15 minutes in 2008. And now that we have years and years of 15-minute data, actually back in 2017, we published this paper. That's what these plots are from, the paper you see at the top there. And we basically asked, we're like, what do we get by doing those extra 5 minutes? Because we had mountains of data, years and years of 15-minute counts where we could subset at the 10-minute mark and versus 15, and we just looked at things. So these plots you see, the set on the left are for focal species, and the set on the right are for secondary species. And you're looking at detection probabilities, so it's a number between 0 and 1 on the vertical axis, with 1 being like easy to detect, really good, and 0 being you're going to miss it. And on the horizontal axis are various combinations of things. And I'll direct you to the ones I've circled. So in this case, the leftmost detection probability in the circle is the full 15 minutes. And these notations, I think P was for passive, so no broadcast. B was for the broadcast, and P was passive again. So this is like the full 15 minutes. 5-minute passive, 5 minutes broadcast in the middle, 5 minutes passive again. And then this middle one is 5 minutes of passive to begin with, and then the broadcast in the second half of the 10 minutes. And this other one is the broadcast in the first 5 minutes and the 5 minutes passive in the second. Because we also, with this analysis, wanted, not only did we want to know what's the difference between a 10-minute count and a 15-minute count, but we wanted to know, of the 10-minute counts, does it matter if you do the broadcast in the first 5 minutes or the second 5 minutes? And that was relevant because when we started the program in 1995, remind me, Kathy, did the broadcast was in the first 5 minutes, wasn't it?
Broadcast was in first,
That's
and we
right.
had passive listening in the path, and then we
But
added the 5 minute front. Yeah.
so yeah, original 1995 to 2007 Great Lakes MMP bird point counts had the broadcast in the first 5 minutes and then passive in the second 5 minutes. But the North American standard that we were talking about on the last slide, it calls for a 10-minute count the other way around. Have the 5-minute passive first and your broadcast in the second 5 minutes. So we wanted to know, does it matter? If you do a 10-minute count, does it matter if the broadcast is in the first 5 or the last 5? So that's why we did those two. Anyway, you can see by just scanning your eyes across all those plots, and um, you'll notice that for the right-hand plots for the secondary species, there's only 2 estimates in the orange ovals. There aren't 3 because broadcasts don't matter for these guys. So we didn't care about the direction. And also the math didn't allow us to do it both ways, which we won't get into. But the main point is the detection probabilities are about the same inside each of the orange ovals. They really don't matter much, which we were actually quite surprised. We thought that the detection probabilities would be much higher in the 15-minute counts because you're there for a whole extra 5 minutes, right? We thought you have more chance of detecting that quietly spittern or finally the whatever calls, and you get it. But the differences were surprisingly little, to the point where our conclusion in the paper was it's not worth staying for that extra 5 minutes. It just isn't. And we also found that it doesn't matter about whether the broadcast's in the first 5 or the second 5. So what we think the recommendation is, let's do it back to 10-minute counts, and we'll do the broadcast in the second 5 minutes so that we align with the North American Standard Protocol. And so we've got this, this paper gives us pretty solid footing. I mean, there are a few little differences. Like if you look at Lee Spittern, you're like, okay, the 15 minutes is a little bit higher here. We're a little bit lower with the 2 10-minute counts, but you're still up pretty decent for detection probabilities within a count. And the other thing to keep in mind, and we talked about this in the paper, is that when it comes to statistics, so you're trying to estimate a trend, or we're trying to estimate total population size, or whatever we're trying to achieve with an analysis when we use MMP data, it's way more useful, bigger money, so to speak, bigger statistical money, we'll say, to have more points sampled than to have fewer points sampled more intensively, if you know what I mean. In other words, you're better off to do 50 stations with 10-minute counts. That's way more useful than doing, say, 30 stations with 15-minute counts. So what we're hoping folks will do is, with the amount of time that you gain by only doing 10 minutes at each of your points, you might be able to do another station in the same evening. And that's gold. That's worth its money in gold, so to speak, in the statistical world, because you have a whole extra replicate, a whole extra point. That puts your sample size up and it makes your power to detect differences for whatever you're trying to achieve much better. So we think this one's a no-brainer. Return to 10-minute counts, do the broadcast in the second half.
So, oh, should mention if you want to, are you done with this slide, Doug?
Yep,
Okay, I'll mention while you move on.
sure.
I want everybody to realize how important it was to go out and do that minute by minute and the 5 minute before and the 5 minute after. This is very, very powerful information that we're often asked to share. And it could not have been collected without you guys being doing that 5 minute detectabilities and the before and the after. Like we've learned so much from this that wasn't previously known. And it's all because of your hard work. Um, so I want to just make sure you recognize how important what you've done has been.
Yep, it definitely wasn't a waste of time at all. I mean, the 15 minutes does get the best data, but it's not so much better, I think, to be worth a whole extra 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Especially when you gain 5 minutes across like 6 stations. Now you got enough time to do a whole other station, at another wetland or maybe another place in the same wetland or whatever. And that's gold. So okay. Um, where are we at for time, Kathy? I'll just do this
Um,
one quick or
yeah, yeah, this one quick.
this one
I
quick.
want
Okay.
to start
This one's
talking
pretty.
maybe 45 minutes. I need to start talking. Yeah.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. We're at 38 minutes. So, okay, this one's pretty easy to do. So this is our habitat sheet, for birds or frogs. And basically the the change we're anticipating we're going to do here is the stuff in the orange oval. I think we'll just get rid of it. Um, and the reason being is it's things like the floating plant cover, the wetland permanency, the marsh size, what's behind you. Um, all these things were really important when we started in 1995 because you couldn't really get this information anywhere else. But now we got all kinds of remote sensing uh, data available to us that we can automate all this stuff. So we don't really need this anymore. It was really important when the program started, but we don't need it anymore. Like, um, wetland size, especially, we can do that with remote sense data way more accurately at whatever distance we want, automated, no problem. And this is like freely available stuff. So we didn't know that in 1995 that, we'd have this stuff. And we can get it backdated too. So we can just make things simple and get rid of that. A lot of it was sort of difficult to do anyway, especially like marsh size. Sometimes you can't really tell how far away the edge is, and it's difficult. So, but the other parts, the estimating the aerial coverage of emergent vegetation versus shrubs and trees and stuff like that within your plot, that's really important, and especially the breakdown of the emergent vegetation. So the places that on the sheet here that have the green arrows, we definitely want to keep that. Estimating that stuff is really important. And we've shown when you're doing like a habitat relationship kind of statistical model or something, having those local estimates that you folks make within the 100 meters is really useful. Like it really makes the models work better. Which, this when you're from your own experience, that the amount of emergent vegetation within 100 meters, of course, it's important. We know, you know yourself, you have more of that stuff, you're going to have more certain species. So it's not a no-brainer.
And we still need that data collected for the next 2 years, please. Make sure we have good
Yeah,
up-to-date
yeah,
results.
continue to fill it in because we want to have, you know, we, we want to have the same thing for everything in a particular year. And then, like Kathy says, we'll go cold turkey, so to speak, and change over completely when we're ready. So yeah, it's important to keep finishing this out. Okay, I can't remember what else I've got next here. Oh yeah, can I keep going, Kathy?
We have a couple questions, yeah, but
Sure.
um, the only one I want to make sure we get to is limiting time factor and nature counts. But sure, keep going for this. We have time
Okay,
still.
this wasn't all that important. This I just wanted to. We already showed this a few slides ago. All I'm showing here is like here's the current Great Lakes MMP bird form. Here's the current habitat form, and these other forms are what we have for the Atlas 3 marsh bird survey. And I think that's what the new sheets are really going to look like. This is what the new bird form will look like. And this is basically, it's our habitat form, but just getting rid of this stuff that we don't need anymore. So it asks a few questions at the beginning, like what kind of wetland are you in? Is it a marsh, a bog, or whatever? You know, a few things like, is it a beaver pond versus some other things? And then basically you've got that, here's your overall estimates of what's in the 100 meters, and then here's the breakdown of the emergent vegetation. It's just those important parts. And here's the one change for the frog protocol that's coming. It's pretty simple. We're just going to, um, we're proposing to lower the threshold temperature for the third visit. So right now it's 17 Celsius. We think that's too high. Again, because we have mountains and mountains of data. You know, we have, I don't know what we've got, like 50,000 frog point counts now since 1995. So we can very precisely estimate what your detection probabilities are across different temperatures. And we can show that, you know, you can go down to probably 12, 13, maybe 11 even for that third visit, and you still have the same chances as 17. So that'll just make things a little more flexible. Sometimes people have a hard time finding a date, you know, like, it was only 14, it was only 15 Celsius. I couldn't do my third visit. Well, yeah, no problem. We'll be able to make that a little more flexible. So that's the one frog thing that's coming. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is we're going to go paperless, or at least we're planning to go paperless in 2027. So no more scannable forms. And so this one of the options is using the Nature Counts mobile app. I'm a bit archaic in that I don't even have a cell phone. I've never used the app. But I'm told by others who are more savvy with these things that it could work, that you can be fast enough with your thumbs, and if you don't drop your phone in the water, you're all good. And that I can see a lot of advantages with this. Like you can see, this is an actual picture here of the app, and you can see there's satellite imagery in the background. So for estimating how far away those distance bands are, I mean, this is gold because you can look there in the app and you're like, okay, that red barn over there is, you know, at the 100-meter mark, or the far side of the marsh is just shy of 100 meters. So I can see for estimating distances, this is really slick. And again, you can put your observations on the app screen just like you would on your paper map. So wherever you tap, that's the distance band, and in front of you and behind you is instantly recorded. And then you just have to put in the time slice, and it has that capability as well. Now, if you're old school and you want to still, like me, and you want to do it on a piece of paper in the field, that's totally fine. There will be a web portal. You can log in and enter your data that way after the fact too.
Now, is that what we're thinking, Doug, web portal, or we're thinking that you can enter data online on the Nature Counts app afterwards?
Either. Yeah, what I,
Either.
you know,
Okay.
I don't really know what I'm talking about because I'm technical. I'm
Because
not
that's
really into this.
that's what I was going to think. The whole thing that we were going to suggest. We don't expect to have a form that looks like a paper form when this is all done. That you can enter it like you would with your owl data, where you put in little rows. We suspect that the way it's going to be entered is it's going to look like the Nature Counts app interface. We could be wrong, and we have to do all those conversations about the programming, but we one of the things we will really want is to get those circles in there and have that data in that circle because that's very functional and useful to us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there'll definitely be. I just wanted to make the point that you don't have to use the Nature Counts app in the field real time.
Yes.
You can record on a clipboard, on a piece of paper, and then there'll be some way when you get home at your computer or whatever, using whatever device, a tablet, doesn't matter, to get an internet connection. There's going to be some way for you to put your data from your piece of paper into something to get it in the database. What the
Uh,
details are exactly, don't know, but there will be a way to do it.
and there's a lot involved. Bill was asking about why when are we going to nature counts. The biggest thing, Bill, is because of the way the data is collected with this program, we needed to have the quality control of the hand papers coming into the office. We cannot check your data as well as we would like on nature counts the way it was presented to us. This resolves that issue because all that data comes in the right format that we can just look at it and quickly say, okay. So we're really cool to see it coming in that way. At least that's what we think is going to be like it. Carolyn has asked about self-service in the app. The Nature Counts app works beautifully without self-service. You just have to upload your maps before you go out in the field. Um, and so I know what we have volunteers use it for owls that do not have cell phone service. What else do we have for questions here?
One thing I'll just while you're looking up the next question, I wanted to mention, um, just be perfectly open about the move to nature counts. Another reason, just so you know, is that the software that we need to make the scannable forms work that actually reads your handwriting, it's really kind of cool. It's kind of creepy that it can read your handwriting. And the software, it's kind of like it's smart, right? Like it goes along, and if it can't decide what one of your letters is, it stops and asks you. So it asks the operator, is this really an E? Or like, what is this? So it asks a human to interpret it. So anyway, the license is actually really expensive for that software. And we only have to buy a license about every 10 years. We bought one last in about 2017, 2018. And at that point, it was fairly um, economical for us because multiple programs, not just the Great Lakes MMP, but the OWL program and a bunch of others, I think there might have been 7 or 8 or even 9 programs, were using the software. So we were able to divide the cost of the license across all these programs. It was actually pretty affordable. A lot of those other programs over the last 10 years have gone paperless. Like we're one of the few last standing. So we can't afford the license. We just can't do it. And we're the licenses that they technically don't ever expire, but they kind of get you because eventually it won't work with the latest Windows operating system, and we're right on the cusp of it not working for us. So we're in this tight spot where we can't buy another license, we can't afford it, we got to go paperless anyway. So that's another reason.
Okay, you in a good spot?
Yeah, I think after this, it went to the science stuff, which maybe we want to leave for the other webinars.
Okay, we can do that. Um,
But I'm easy, whatever you want to do. It's
yeah,
now, so we got 10 minutes left
yeah,
till
and,
8.
and Bill will have Bill come in 2 years. He has some good tips. So we'll have Bill come in 2 years. I'm hitting you up for this now, Bill, to come in with your birding tips using the app and using full circles, because I think you've done the Atlas Marsh Monitoring, and we should kudos for Doug because he was involved with the development of the Atlas Marsh Monitoring. So that's great. Now, I just had a few things I wanted to share with you guys, and some of this may relate a little bit more to new folks. I'm just finding my notes here, and I got to share a couple pages. Can you stop sharing, Doug?
Oh, yes. Yep. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. I want screen one. All right. All right. So you guys can see a lovely picture of one of our surveyors looking out at birds.
Yep. Got it.
Um, so what I wanted to share with you is a few things about training materials. Um, in case a lot of the new people may have gone happily looking for training materials earlier this year and discovered none of the links worked. That was an unexpected occurrence based on us migrating our websites to a new server, which is something that part of the you have to do with websites. But if you're ever looking for um, training materials, you need to go to the volunteer portal, which is a Marsh monitoring program on nature counts, and you're at about, where are we here? If you're under my data, it says training MP3s. And under manage, it says, I got too many choices. Under about, it says resources. But I do like the site. And so this is the list of all the training MP3 files that we used to give out originally on tape, on cassette tape, and then on CD. So they're all available here. There's also these two cool things here, which are the scripts of the original one. And if you want a cheat sheet to help you learn your bird calls and your frog calls, those are the two best tools I have seen out there to learn the bird calls and frog calls associated with this program. Now, for those who like something different, Doug, can you see the pictures of me and the Loon Alert sign now? Or are you still in the other one?
I can see the Loon Alert sign and you.
Okay, so this is just a different one. It's a podcast version that you can run through, and I put that up on SoundCloud. And you just have to look for Volunteer for Birds. Some people like this, some people don't. I don't know what's best. But what I really wanted to show you is having a conversation with our website programmers, and I'm going to switch over to another one that's going to look exactly like the old one, but it says training files. I think you can see that, Doug. And
Yep.
this is where I think our next generation of training materials are going to end up. And I wanted to share them to you because it's kind of cool. So what it is set up so you can read the file and you can play the related marsh bird introduction and in the information, and then you can read the next file on the next species and play the tape and so forth for all 58 tracks. Now we'll probably split those up somewhat birds, somewhat amphibians, so you have both options, but they're all going to be there. We're still going to have either a download that you can grab a whole zipped file and download everything to your favorite system, but this will give you another option that I think will work very, very well on the phone. Um, and that's the biggest things I have to share. We do have a few questions, and I'm going to stop sharing now. Um, so some of the questions we got in advance for this event. The first one was, Doug, are we impacted at all by Trump when it comes to running this program with the
Yeah, so
Great Lakes
really good,
partnerships?
really good question. Um, I mean, we are to a certain extent. I mean, to be honest, we do have some US federal grant money that is sort of up in the air as to whether we're going to get it or not, and we don't really know anything. But we're really used to this game at Birds Canada being a charity. We're used to money coming and going, and we're used to uncertainty. We've always made it through times like this, and I'm pretty hopeful that I mean, we've already found some replacement money for some of the money we know we're not going to get from south of the border. So yes, it's impacting us because we're scrambling a bit and to replace funds we've lost because of that. But at the same time, I think we're going to be able to make ends meet and we'll make it through. So, like I say, we're used to this game. So, but a really good question.
All right. So the next question is, I'd like to be added to the distribution list of the newsletter. The Marsh Monitoring Program produces one newsletter a year, and it's a lot of work for us. We try very hard to make it useful for everybody, and we hope we succeed. It includes analysis. It's readily available on the website, and we don't distribute it to a large range of people. We only send it out to the volunteers. But if you and all we do is we send them a link, and they can look it up themselves. So if you want to see the newsletter, it's just always available on the Birds Canada website, and then you look up the Great Lakes Monitoring Program, and it's there. Another question that I think relates to this is somebody asked what to do with an injured bird. That's not our area of expertise. Neither Doug nor I are involved with that. Because of my affiliation with Stewardship of Common Loon, I've learned a bit though. And the biggest thing is to know that you have the legal right to take that bird to a safe place, like off a road to a safer place or to a rehabber. That's what your legal rights are with birds. Keep an eye out for avian influenza. You need to use some protection when you're handling birds nowadays. And I've added two links on Bird, which, in my opinion, are the two only really successful places to look for a rehabber closest to you. And then you just have to call them and talk to them about what to do next. And they may decide whether they can accept the bird or not. And that's all we can suggest. It's, as I said, it's not our area of expertise. Tick protection prevention, I can hold that off to the next one. A couple other ones that I don't know if you want to wade into this one. Dilly's asked, wouldn't the limiting factor be time because you can't walk to a station in 500 meters anyways? Because it'd probably take more than 5 minutes. Well, Dilly's with frogs, you're right. Frog's a limiting factor is certainly not the time it takes to do the survey because you could do one survey in 3 minutes. It is the distance in between, but birds are a bit different. It comes into that play if you have four stations that are 15 minutes apart versus six stations that are 10, you can also fit in a 250-meter or 500-meter walk in total in there. So this is something we noticed when we switched to a 15-minute workshop survey to begin with, is that we had to be careful. Some routes could not be done before dark. So the exact we it may have a bit of a positive effect, and people can fit it into their schedule better, which is the biggest thing. You have everybody's busy, so you have to have a schedule. Um,
You're absolutely right, though. The dividends really have to accumulate across several points in a evening or in a session before you have enough time to stick in an extra point. So it's not
yeah.
like we're, getting double or something, but it does sort of free up some time across enough stations in one evening or one morning or whatever to maybe stick in an extra one.
And Dilly's does a really big marsh. Not everybody has that luxury, so not everybody has space to put extra stations. We still have that same problem limiting marsh availability. Um, Bill was asking about a third bird visit. Bill, there's been an optional third bird's visit since about 2010.
It's a
Uh,
really good point.
yeah.
Like that, the North American standard calls for 3 visits per season. Um, we don't we're not considering moving to a third visit. It's the same kind of, this is the a question always with when you're trying to design a monitoring program. The question always is it more optimal? Is it better to sample fewer sites more intensively or more sites less intensively? And it's always a toss up. Um, there's actually a paper for Great Lakes coastal wetlands for marsh birds that recommends that you only make 1 visit per year because, like I said before, the money, so to speak, the statistical money is in the number of stations, not as and far less in how intensively you sample each station. So it actually says you should never go back even for a second visit, let alone a third. You should always do new stations because that's where the statistical money is. So I think based on that paper and some of our analyses that we haven't published, but where we've kind of looked at what you gain with that third bird visit, I think the sweet spot is in the middle with the 2 visits. I think you definitely need two. I think that's too little. I think you need the early visit and the late visit to balance things out. But I think rather than go to a third visit, I think you're better off using your whatever time you might gain if it might means doing more stations. If that'll depend, as the point was made earlier. You can't always, even if you gain time, you still may not be able to add another station. But if you can, that's the way to go because stations are what it's about.
Okay. One more question. Anybody has some last minute questions? We certainly cannot delve into another topic. We didn't get near as much done. And we will, if you send me questions that need to be answered on frogs and birds, we will talk about them and we'll put them prioritized for the next session, 2 sessions. But if you don't, well, then I'm going to have to pick and choose what I think is important to you. So definitely send your questions because your probably opinions are different from mine. But there's one last question, and I think it might relate to something you said tonight, something about priority locations along the Grand River that needed surveyors.
Good question.
We're not quite sure what you're referring to, Kyle. You can certainly go online and see where we've had surveys and where we have available routes on the Grand River. My biggest problem with the Grand River is most of the routes that are available are canoe routes or water boat routes. And those have higher skill challenges for birds because you have to be better at your sound skills for sure. Is also for both birds and frogs. It's a little bit more challenging, especially frogs and high currents and springs. Like, can you picture being out on Grand River next week? You want to know what you're doing before we stick you out there.
Some beautiful wetlands, though.
Yeah.
I did a route south of Dunville. Big, huge marsh, beautiful. You no idea you're in the middle of southern Ontario. It's a fantastic place. Least bitterns, all kinds of cool stuff out there. Totally different world.
So it's exactly 8 o'clock, and I'm glad everybody came. I'm hoping that you'll come back for the next one. And any other final questions before we sign off?
Yeah, and I just want to quickly say thank you very much, everybody. I've been looking through the chat and the comments, and it's really useful to get your feedback on the full circle and all those other aspects. That's really, really great that you were able to put your thoughts in there. That's really useful to see. So thank you very much.
And share them later. Like this is going to be new, and we like to give you lots of notice about changes, but we won't think of everything. Linda raised her hand. I'll see if I can give you the permission to talk. Linda, I should be able to. Oh, maybe she just unraised her hand. Um, I don't even know which Linda it was. Sorry, Linda.
There's one more question here in the chat
Oh,
I can answer real quick. How many nights in a row at 5 Celsius to start frog surveys? This is something we're going to talk more about with the tips and tricks for the frog stuff in one of the other webinars. But very quickly, like I think the way to go when you're in doubt about frog surveys is if you have a wetland near your place, you sort of have a good feel for what the frog composition is in terms of species, just use it as your barometer. Once the species you expect, you're hearing them in that wetland, and if you know it kind of correlates with where you're going to do your surveys, that's sort of you're like, okay, we're good to go because these frogs are once this species I hear them here, then I know we're good to go. That seems to be the best way.
yeah.
Otherwise, I think we're going to have to go to measuring water temperatures
And
to
there's
to
still
figure
so
things
many
out.
variables involved. And Doug and I both use this method. We listen at home and see what's happening. I have to be more careful because I have a coastal site and I live inland, so I'll have frogs calling home much
Yep.
earlier.
The
Um,
coastal
um,
wetlands that are on the big lake take a lot longer to warm up
mhm,
because it's got that
yeah.
cold water from the big lake. So yeah, your inland shallow wetlands warm up a lot sooner, like by sometimes by like a week or more.
And that's also why you'll hear me say when you sign up, are you sure you want to drive that far? It's the main, I have done those long roads. I did a 40-minute road trip to do a coastal wetland site once, and it was really, really difficult to get it right.
It's
Um,
fascinating the difference. Like sometimes here at Long Point, if you drive 5 or 6 kilometers inland, it can be like a code 3 for peepers. And you go out on the causeway in the big creek marsh, the big coastal marsh, and there's nothing
yeah,
calling yet.
yeah.
Like
And
code 3 versus nothing, 5 6 kilometers difference.
I like to use Weather Underground, which is a series of home users weather network systems that are all online on the internet. So you can find one close to where you're surveying and look up the weather right there. It's one of my favorite things. Um, but that's the best thing to do is just find that something that you trust that gives you right weather for wherever your surveys are. And we always say about the time of the second warm spring night. But that's so hard to judge. We both find it's easier just to listen. Listen, and when you hear frogs calling at night, that's the time to go.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, I think we're done, folks. Thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, thanks again. That
Um,
was fun.
yep. And we'll see you all maybe next week. It's next week or the week after. We'll see you
Can't
all at the
remember.
next one. All right. Take care.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Night.